Okay, so we are doing lab 3, which is the bones of the skull. And we have this really cool model here of the skull, which we got from a maker in Germany. And as you can see, all the bones are color-coded, so that helps a lot try to distinguish one from another. So I'm just going to walk you through this worksheet, and if you follow along with me, you'll probably get all the answers. But we'll start here, and the first thing it instructs you to do is to remove the mandible from the skull model. So we're gonna, these are connected by magnets and hopes and prayers. And so I'm gonna take the mandible off here, and you can see that there, it looks just like the illustrations we had in our notes. And so I'm gonna place that over here. And note that along the side you can see the mastoid process here. And so in the worksheet, it gives you the instruction to name a muscle that attaches to the mastoid process. There are a few, but there's one particularly famous one in our notes that attaches to that mastoid process. So the next thing I want to call your attention to is the zygomatic bones. These are these light orange bones here, which are what you feel when you feel your cheekbones. And they form part of the orbit of the eye as well as the cheekbone. And the instructions say to remove these bones. So we take that one and that one. Hopefully he doesn't fall apart. If he does, we'll edit it out. Okay. So now we have the remaining part of the skull. So we've removed the zygomatic bones, and we're now going to remove the maxilla. So I'm going to pull it down gently, and some other bones are going to come with it. We'll talk about these structures in a bit, but first let's look at the maxilla for a moment. So you notice that you have the maxilla, which is forms the rest of your cheeks. We have the teeth, of course, are going in these alveoli, the alveolar ridge, which is down here. I just wanted to point out the palate here. We've got some sutures. There's a suture that goes down the middle, the intermaxillary suture, and then we have this horizontal suture, which is the palatine suture. So we have hard palate here. There's a small portion of your palate that's also these other bones called palatine bones. And they, as you can see, if I separate these in a sagittal plane, you can see they come together this way. But we have a nasal bone. We have this tiny little bone is called the lacrimal bone, and you can probably, if they zoom in, you can see that there's sort of a canal here. That's where the tears travel through and then go up to the orbit of the eye where they get into the eye for crying. This is the nasal bone. There are two of them. It's a paired bone. They have a suture here at the superior aspect of the maxilla. And then inside, we have these other structures. So you can see that this is the palatine bone here, and then we have this light orange structure, which is part of the conchae, the nasal conchae. Okay, and so there are points of articulation in here. There's a lot going on in that nasal cavity. You do know, sometimes you can feel the suture where these two parts of the maxilla have come together in gestation. So this is what the maxilla looks like intact. So next I want to call your attention to the remaining bones that I mentioned. So we have this purple bone that kind of is a point right here, and we have this white bone here, which I will remove in a moment and show you some of its features. But these two together, there's a perpendicular plate in this bone, which is called the ethmoid bone, and this is the vomer bone. And the perpendicular plate and the vomer line up, and that actually forms the septum of your nose. So we have a bony portion here and here. This space in here, you can feel it. It's wiggly, it's cartilage. So you've got the nasal bones, you can feel where they stop and where the cartilage begins to make the third part of that septum. So I'm going to remove this bone here. And it's really difficult to describe this in 2D, so I really like that we have this model. This is how it's oriented as if the person is facing you. That's how the vomer bone appears, I guess face you like that. But if you notice, it's got sort of two flanges on the side. And these are called the ala, one ala, two ala, two ala, A-L-A-E, whatever you say, however you say that. So they have this orientation where they articulate with other bones in there, but it's a unique bone. We call these, again, the wings of the vomer. So the vomer bone sometimes is described as a plowshare, and most of you are like, what the heck is that? There may be a few of you online students from agricultural areas who know what a plow looks like, but it would be kind of a wedge going into the soil to turn over the dirt. So that's what this is supposed to be like. I'm going to remove the ethmoid bone, and it looks kind of like a walnut. And as you can see, when these articulate just so, that's what's forming your septum. The ethmoid bone is a really interesting bone because it has this little tiny part that actually protrudes up into the space encompassed by the frontal bone. So let's take the frontal bone off. I'll replace the ethmoid bone just so you can see what it looks like. This point right here where the ethmoid comes up is called the crista galli. And there are a lot of points, this is a landmark for a lot of connections. So you can see that even though it's considered a maxillary bone, it does have a little bit of an incursion into the cerebral space. What we have left is this funny looking yellow bone, okay? This bone is called the sphenoid bone. And you can see it in 3D. It doesn't really show up very much from the side. It's a very small portion of your cheekbone on the side here. But internally, it's really a major part of the supportive structure of the brain and the facial structures. So I'm going to pull it out here, and we'll look at its parts. So this is the one that some people think it looks like a bat or a butterfly or something. And it has what we call the superior wings and the inferior wings. We also have these two little extensions here, which are called the pterygoid plates. So we have the lateral, the external, and the internal pterygoid plates. These are also a point of attachment for a lot of muscles. And in fact, later on, you're going to learn about a muscle called the tensor veli palatini, which is actually not tensing the palate, but that's what they thought it used to do. But anyway, it is a muscle that originates further back in the skull, moves forward, and kind of hooks around a little extension that comes from these internal pterygoid plates. Those are called, they extend from the hamulus, okay? And this muscle kind of wraps around the hamulus before it continues on in its direction, go to the other side of the face. And there are, again, muscles we're going to learn about that are attached to some of these landmarks. So lateral, medial, pterygoid plates. We'll be calling them lateral and medial. Okay, so the hamulus, as I said, projects from the medial pterygoid plate. Let's look again at the palate, because question number 10, says which palatal suture runs sagittally, so that would be this one. And that, you have to decide whether that's the transverse or the intermaxillary. I already said it earlier, so you probably got it. And then which palatal suture runs coronally. So I said horizontal, but remember, when we have a organism and we slice it this way, separating front from back, we call that coronal. So this is a coronal suture right here. Okay, so now we've covered most of the bones. I do want to review again that we can kind of see here. I'm not able to pull a tooth out, but if I were to pull out a tooth, you'd see that there's a round, sort of a cavernous structure that the tooth goes into. Each one of those round openings into which the root of the tooth goes is called an alveolus. These are different than the alveoli in the lungs we learned about, but the root word is the same. It's kind of a sac type shape. And so that's why we call this structure right here the alveolar ridge, because it's the ridge where all these alveoli exist for the teeth to insert. So that's a close-up view of the hard palate. Okay, so now we've talked about most of the bones that are going to be related to muscles and points of attachment for articulation. But since we're here with this skull, I want to call your attention to a few other things. Most of the bones in our body are paired, so we have a left one and a right one. But there are a few bones in our cerebral structure that are not paired. So I just wanted to kind of walk you through. These are the parietal bones, okay? We have the temporal bones here. You can see the external auditory meatus right there in the thyroid process. So back here we have this purple bone, which is not paired. So what bone is that? You can fill that out on your worksheet, okay? And I'm going to put another unpaired bone back. So there are two bones that are not paired. We have a few other candidates. There's one of these, there's one of these, there's one of these, and there's one of these. So you can identify those in your worksheet, and that concludes our lab.